These are your 4-3B notes on factoring. We're going to factor some different types of polynomials, trinomials, which means there's 3 terms, difference of perfect squares, and so we're going to review a little bit of FOILing and multiplying in the mix. So to factor a trinomial, you can use guess, check, and revise. And you can also know that a trinomial is usually the product of 2 binomials that combine like terms. So I like to give you this example with FOIL. To remember how to FOIL, you take the first terms, that's what the F stands for in FOIL, and you multiply them together. So that would be x times x, which is x squared. O is for your outer terms, and so that's the term outside in each of these parentheses, which is a positive 6x. Inner is the inside 2 terms, so you're always multiplying 1 from each quantity, which is a positive 2x. And then L stands for last, and so that's the last term in each of the parentheses, first, outer, inner, last. It's a way to multiply everything in the first quantity with everything in the second quantity, and so the last terms would give us a positive 12. So when you multiply a binomial times a binomial is 2 terms, so this is a 2 by 2, you're going to get 4 solutions. That's your first, outer, inner, last. You multiply 2 numbers by 2 more numbers, you're going to get a total of 4. But inside here, a positive 6x and a positive 2x are like terms, and so they get combined together, and that's how we get a trinomial. So a trinomial is usually the product of 2 binomials with like terms. We had a few trinomials yesterday where it was just a greatest common factor, but today our answers are going to be binomials. So one of the ways that we can do this is just guess, check, and revise. A little bit difficult to do, but some of you guys are pretty good at it, and I wouldn't say that you couldn't use it if you're good at it, okay? So we know that there's no greatest common factor. I looked at it. There's nothing in common with all 3 terms. So that means we have to look and see, maybe it was when you did binomial multiplication that we had like things combined, and that's how we got that 7x. So when you look at this, I usually work with the first term and the last term, and then deal with the outer and inner and kind of guess and check and revise there. So I'm okay with guessing, but it does require that you do check it and that you revise it. Guess, check, and revise is the whole process. It's not just called guess. So I look at this first term and I say x squared. The way I can get x squared is multiplying an x times an x. That's the only way you can get a positive x squared. To get a positive 12, there's a couple different things that I could multiply. So I'm going to guess 6 and 2. So if I put a positive 6 here and a positive 2, I get 12 when I FOIL. But when I check my outer and inner terms, the outer and inner terms don't work. So this is where I'm going to check my solution. First terms gives me x squared. Outer terms gives me a positive 2x. Inner terms gives me a positive 6x. And my last terms is positive 12. These 2 do not add up to negative 7x. They add up to a positive 8x. So what I just realized was I guessed, I checked it, and I was wrong. So I'm going to start over and try a different couple numbers. I do notice that my 7 is negative and that my 12 is positive. So I'm assuming that both my terms are negative. And so I have to keep that in mind, that 7, that negative 7, along with the 12. So my next try at this, I'm going to try another guess. My x and my x were good, but my 12 was not so great. So I'm going to go through a different product to get 12, and I'm going to use 4 and 3. I can see a 7 in 4 and 3. And if I had a negative 3 and a negative 4, when I add them together, it would give me my negative 7. So you just kind of have to work through the signs, work through the multiplication, and make sure that it does, in fact, make that middle term. So when I check this, I get first term gives me x squared, outside terms gives me negative 4x, inside terms gives me negative 3x, and last terms gives me a positive 12. And these 2 terms, in fact, give me negative 7x that I needed. So the solution, the factored form of that trinomial is x minus 3 times x minus 4. The second problem, little guess, check, and revise. I need to come up with some numbers. So again, x squared, it's pretty easy, x and x. 42 is a little bit more difficult because there's a lot of numbers that make 42. So I'm not just going to think of 42, I'm also going to keep in mind negative 13. So again, I have that negative that tells me if I'm combining, either one of them was negative or they're both negative. But the fact that when I multiply these two numbers, it's positive, tells me my signs were two negatives. In order to get a negative sum of 13, they have to be negative. And in order to get a product of positive 42, they both have to be negative. So I can go through and I can think through all the different multiples of 42, like 1 and 42. No way is that going to give me 13. 2 and 21. I don't care if I add them or subtract them, nowhere near 13. 3 goes into it. 3 goes into 42 14 times. Not going to give me 13. And then I think of 6 and 7 are the next two numbers. There's my answer. I can see 13 in there. So minus 6, minus 7, you're done. Okay, so guess and check does require a little bit of thinking, a lot more processing, and a lot less work. But once you get it to work, you should check your answer. X squared. Outer term gives me negative 7x. Inner term gives me negative 6x. And last term gives me a positive 42. These two add up to give me the negative 13x, so we're good to go. Okay, so we start off with the first and third, but it has to make sure everything works with that middle term. All right, this next problem, I've got a x squared again, and now I have a negative number. So x squared is pretty simple, and x times an x. But a negative 30 means that I have to, if I'm multiplying to get a negative 30, I have to have a positive and a negative that I'm multiplying together. And in addition, I got to look at this 7 to help me out. So these two numbers have to add up to a positive 7. So I think of the factors of 30, and I think of 1 and 30. Nope, that's out. 2 goes into it 15 times. Nope, that's not going to give me 7. And I just work my way down the list. 3 goes into 30 10 times. Ooh, 3 and 10 might work. Okay, so I'm looking at 3 and 10. I put my positive 3 here and my negative 10 here. That gives me negative 30. This gives me my x squared. When I do my inner and outer, I get a negative 10x and a positive 3x. That leaves me with negative 7x. Oh, so close. So what if I just switch it around and say x minus 3 and x plus 10? What if my 10 was positive and my 3 was negative? So what I'm going to get here is x squared plus 10x minus 3x minus 30. There's my 7x. So the factored form is x minus 3 times x plus 10. So that's how guess and check works. Guess and check gets really difficult when you have a 2 out in front or a number out in front. So we'll try this one, but we won't spend too much time on the guess and check with these. So to get a 2x squared, I know one of these has to be a 2x and the other one has to be an x. It's just figuring out which one is the 2x and which one's the x. And I know I need to make 12 when I multiply these two numbers and add up to 11. But that 2 out in front is going to double every number that when I multiply this by it. So when I do my outer dimension, it's going to get twice as big. So I want to put half the amount in there to adjust for that. So I'm going to find my two numbers, 12. I need to multiply to give 12, and it needs to give me a positive 11. So positive 12 tells me I'm multiplying two positive numbers or two negative numbers. Positive 11 tells me that they're both positive numbers. So I look at this and I think 1 and 12, not going to work. Okay, 2 and 6 is not going to work. 3 and 4 is not going to work. Well, the reason being is because of that 2. So actually, I'm not really looking for what multiplies to give me 12. I'm looking for a number that multiplies to give me 24. So you have to consider that 2 when you're doing these. So when you look at this and you're trying to guess and check, how am I going to get 24 out of this and 11? And the 2 numbers that come to mind are 8 and 3. So I'm going to put my 3 here, and I'm going to put my 8, but I can't put 8 here. I got to put half of it, which would be 4. I'll get my 8 when I do my outer and inner. So again, that gets a little tricky, but when I do my check, 2x squared plus 8x plus 3x plus 12. So again, I found the 2 numbers were 8 and 3. I had to multiply that 12 by 2 and look for a number that gave me 24 rather than 12. But when I found the 2 numbers, I had to take half of that number 8 because I multiply it by 2. So a little tricky to do guess and check with those numbers. Another way to do this is to always do it in a systematic way. I like this way. I like guess and check. I do a combination of both, but this will make sure that it works out every single time. So if you think of the quadratic, ax squared plus bx plus c, you're going to call something a multiply number is a times c. So we're going to look for what multiplies to give us the number a times c and what adds to give us the term b. So make a little chart. And then that will always tell you what the middle 2 terms were. We kind of did this in guess and check. So if you look at number 5, there's a number 1 out in front here. My multiply number, I'm going to take this 1 and multiply it by the 6, and I get 6. My add number is the b value 5. So this little chart, we answer a little riddle. Okay? So what we're doing here is we're going to write the trinomial in descending order. Your AC and your B numbers, you're saying what multiplies to give me AC and adds to give me B. And then we're going to split the middle term into 2 terms. So what that does is we're going to take that 5x and we're going to rewrite it as what it was when it was an outer term and an inner term by figuring out this riddle. What multiplies to give me 6 and adds to give me 5. So what we're trying to do is make this trinomial into 4 terms. Once we get it into 4 terms, we can simply just continue factoring the way we did when we used grouping. I can't move that, sorry. So if I can get this trinomial to look like a 4-termed polynomial, we can use grouping from the day before. So the whole issue is figuring out what 5x was before it was 5x. Was it a 2x and a 3x? Okay, was it a 6 and a negative 1x? We don't know. So when we figure out this riddle, what 2 numbers multiply to give me 6 and add to give me 5? The answer is 2 and 3. 2 times 3 equals 6, and 2 plus 3 equals 5. So what that tells me is that 5x was actually a 2x and a 3x beforehand. Remember, we're rewinding the multiplication. So I'm going to rewrite x squared. I'm going to rewrite 5x as a positive 2x and a positive 3x. And I'm going to leave 6. So the only thing I change in that trinomial is the middle 2 terms. Split it down the middle and factor by grouping. So this should all be repeat from before. So you take out an x. So you're going to divide by x, x goes on the outside. I'm left with x plus 2. On the other side, divide by 3, take out a 3, I'm left with x plus 2. And so because these 2 quantities match, the outside numbers can be put together. So I'm left with x plus 3 times x plus 2. There's your factored form. Now guess and check would have been easy to figure that out too. So a lot more work on paper, but a lot less thinking. It really helps like problems like number 6 when you have that number out in front. So here's your A value, here's your B value, here's your C value. We're looking for what multiplies to give me AC, which is 30, and what adds to give me the B value, negative 13. So you go through and you try to figure out what multiplies to give you 30 and negative 13. To get a positive 30 when you multiply and a negative 13 is a product, that tells me that the 2 numbers are negative. and it's going to be a -3 and a -10. This is the hardest part of this whole process, coming up with the two numbers. That multiplication chart that I gave you yesterday will help out a little bit. So I know that -13x in this trinomial, before it became -13x, it was actually a -3x and a -10x. So rewrite the first term, 3x squared minus 3x minus 10x plus 10. Divide it down the middle, factor the first group, take out a 3x, divide by 3x, divide by 3x, 3x times x minus 1. Take out an, I'm going to need a -10 taken out, and my sign is determined because I need to make this x positive, and I need to make that 10 divided by -10 a -1. Because these both are -1s, I can take the two outside numbers and put them together. So I'm running out of room. 3x minus 10 times x minus 1. There's your factored form. Number 7 over here. Number 7, we're going to do, this is my A term, this is my B term, this is my C. So I'm looking for what multiplies to give me -10, that's A times C, and what adds to give me -9. I have a product that's negative, that tells me one number is going to be positive and one's going to be negative. And my sum is negative, which tells me the larger one is going to be negative. So I think about 10 and 9. I'm thinking 10 and 1 work, and the 10 has to be negative. If I multiply -10 times 1, I get -10. If I add these together, I get -9. So that tells me what to split -9x into to get my solution. So I end up with 2x squared. The order in which you put these in, I can put the -10 over here, or I can put the 1 over here. It's up to you. I'm going to put the -10x over here, plus 1x minus 5. Split it down the middle, factor by grouping. In the first group, a 2x is in common with each other. So I'm going to divide by 2x, both sides. 2x on the outside leaves me with x minus 5. On the inside, I'm going to divide by 1, divide by 1. That's a positive 1, x minus 5. The minus 5, x minus 5 match up. That tells me I'm doing it right. So I put these outside numbers together. 2x plus 1, x minus 5. And there's the solution. So it's very repetitive. This is what I like about this system. There's a lot of work, but it takes the thinking out of it. Guess and check and revise is good sometimes, but you got to do a lot more thinking. All right, last one, then we're going to take a break here. So what multiplies, here's my A value, my B value, and my C value. What multiplies to give me -6 and adds to give me +5. If I multiply and the answer is a negative, that means I multiplied a positive times a negative. If my answer is positive, the larger number is positive. So when I think of these numbers, I could think of a 2 and a 3, but if one's positive, one's negative, I'm going to get ones and negative ones. So they're out. But how about a 6 and a 1? 6 times 1, and I'm going to make the 1 negative. When I multiply 6 times -1, it equals -6. And when I add these together, I get a +5. So this is what 5x was before it was a 5x. So I rewrite my term as a 4-termed x squared minus 1x plus 6x minus 6. Again, you could put the 1 with the 6 or the 6. It doesn't matter where you put them. Split it down the middle. I can take an x out of both of these. That leaves me with x times the quantity, x minus 1. I can take a +6 out of both of these. That leaves me with x minus 1, x plus 6, x minus 1. There you go. There you have it. So we're going to stop right there, and we're going to factor trinomials. I'm going to give you one to try for homework. So we're not going to do the whole lesson summary and everything else. Actually, I think we can, because I think it actually pertains to that. Don't worry about the lesson summary. We'll answer that on a different date. But I want you to factor as a practice problem. So we're going to skip through. We'll come back and finish the other notes. But I feel like after our notes from the first day, we're struggling a little bit. So we're going to break it into a smaller chunk. So just do the practice problem tonight, and we'll worry about the lesson summary later on. Good luck.